Listen now. Listen close. Because the words I'm about to speak to you, they got to be heard slow. Got to be heard in the quiet of your own room, in the dark, where the sound of this old voice is the only thing keeping you tethered to what you know to be real. You know, most folks, most of them believe that silence is what you get when sound goes away. They think of silence like it's empty, like it's the absence of something. But I'm here to tell you different. I'm here to whisper to you about silence that ain't empty at all. Silence that's full of presence. Silence that's breathing. What I'm about to tell you tonight, it's about a place up in the Smokies where 3 men went in the autumn of 1987, and only one of them came back out. And even he, well, even he didn't come back the same. They say he sat in that hospital room for 17 days without speaking a single word. 17 days of absolute, perfect silence. And when they asked him what happened, when they finally got him to open his mouth, all he did was smile. Just smiled and smiled. And they say if you listen to the recording of that smile, you can hear something underneath it. A rustling, like leaves that ain't never seen sunlight. That's case file 070. That's the velvet damp. And by the time this story reaches its end, you're gonna understand why silence, friend, why silence is the most dangerous sound of all. Let me take you back now, back to October of '87, when the fall was just beginning to paint the mountains in shades of rust and amber. The Smokies were beautiful that time of year, the kind of beautiful that makes your chest ache, the kind that makes you feel small and temporary. A man named William Reeves set out from Gatlinburg on a Saturday morning. He was a photographer back then, young still, probably about 35 years old. Tall fella, wore these thick glasses that always seemed to be slipping down his nose. He had a degree in forestry from some university down in Tennessee, and he'd become obsessed, and I do mean obsessed, with documenting the old logging camps that had been abandoned after the Depression and the post-war years. William had heard rumors about a particular camp. The locals called it the Green Logging Camp, though nobody quite remembered why. Maybe it was because of how everything up there had gone green. Maybe it was something else. He drove a beat-up Jeep up a mountain road that was barely more than a suggestion, really. More a scar through the trees than anything official. And the deeper he went, the quieter things got. not peaceful quiet. You understand the difference? There's the quiet you get in a library. That's peaceful. It's chosen. But this was the quiet of a place that had rejected sound. Like the air itself had gone thick, like it was refusing to carry noise any longer. The trees up there were the strangest thing he noticed first. Massive hemlocks and Fraser firs, their trunks wrapped, and I mean wrapped, like you'd wrap a gift, in this velvet moss. Not the thin, papery moss you see on normal trees. This was thick, deep green, almost black in the shadows. It hung from branches like the hair of corpses. It cushioned every footfall. When William stepped into that place, his feet made no sound, none at all. And the air smelled like standing over a grave that's been opened after 100 years. Wet earth, decay that was also somehow alive. That contradiction, that's important. Decay that was still feeding something. The clearing where the camp building stood revealed itself slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical baths. 3 large structures, what looked like a main lodge, a workers' dormitory, and a workshop where the logging machinery had been abandoned, left to rust and return to the earth. All of them, every surface, was covered in that impossible moss. Even the metal parts had it. Moss growing on steel, which shouldn't be possible. But there it was. What struck William most wasn't the decay or the abandonment. It was the silence. Complete, absolute, total silence. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through the canopy, though William could see the trees moving above him, could see their branches swaying gently, but no sound, like someone had muted the whole world. He would later write, and I do have access to his journals, fragments of them anyway, that it felt like stepping into a church at midnight, that the silence had weight, that it pressed against his eardrums, a physical thing, like deep water pressure. He stood there in that clearing for perhaps 5 minutes, just breathing, just letting his eyes adjust to the particular quality of the light there. The moss had thinned the sunlight, made everything move in shades of green and silver. He felt his heartbeat slowing, his breathing becoming more shallow, a drowsiness beginning to creep into his limbs, like the first stages of coming down with a fever. And he thought, I could sleep here. I could sleep right here in the dirt and moss, and it would be the most restful sleep I've ever had. That thought, he would later understand, was the first sign that the velvet damp was already working on him. William didn't sleep that night, though it was close. He fought it. He kept himself moving, kept himself documenting everything with his camera. Photographs that, when he developed them later, would show nothing but static-like patterns, as if his film itself had been affected by something in that place. The main lodge was still furnished, after a fashion. Chairs and tables warped by decades of moisture. A kitchen with pots still on the stove, lids rusted into place. Bedrooms with mattresses that had become one with the moss, so thoroughly that you couldn't tell where the fabric ended and the fungal growth began. But it was in the foreman's office that William found them. The journals. 12 of them stacked carefully on a desk that was otherwise bare. The leather covers were brittle but intact, preserved somehow by the constant cool and the quiet. The earliest entry was dated June 15th, 1952. William's hand shook as he opened the first volume. And I want you to understand, there's a particular fear that comes from finding evidence that other people before you have walked into the same trap. That knowledge, that prior warning written in a dead man's hand, it changes everything. The entries began mundane. Weather turning, logged 16 acres, men in good spirits. Found a peculiar moss in the eastern section, green as anything I've ever seen. Beautiful, really. But as the weeks progressed, the tone shifted. The handwriting, you could see it in photographs William took, began to deteriorate. Letters becoming inconsistent, sentences fragmenting. By August of that year, the entries read like this. The moss. It's in the logging site itself now, thick as carpet. Men don't complain about felling timber anymore. Don't complain about anything. Just work. Work quiet. Work silent. The sound of the axes is muffled. Everything muffled. I wonder if something is growing in my ears. I wonder if something is... The next entry, dated a week later, I understand now. The moss isn't a plant. It's a listener. It listens so perfectly, so completely, that sound itself begins to suspect it doesn't exist. It drinks sound. It drinks voices. It drinks the will to speak. 3 men came to me today, and they wanted to leave. They tried to speak, but the moss had reached up their throats and into their mouth. They couldn't make words, just breathing, just the sound of breathing, which is no sound at all. The final entry, written in what appeared to be scratches, barely legible. I'm not sleeping. I haven't slept in, I can't remember. Time is moss now. Everything is moss now. I can feel it in my chest. It's soft. It's kind. It's singing. Can you hear it? Can you hear how quiet it is? How perfectly, beautifully quiet? There were no more entries after that. William's hands were trembling as he photographed every page. He told himself he was collecting evidence, building a record, but really he was transfixed, terrified, because part of him, the part that had been touched by that beautiful, perfect silence, wanted to understand what the foreman had experienced. Part of him wondered if giving into it would feel like coming home after a long journey. He sat in that office for hours, reading by the fading light, and he didn't hear a single sound from the outside world. The moss had already begun its work. When darkness fell, William realized he'd made a crucial error. He'd positioned his camp, a small tent and sleeping bag, at the very edge of the clearing. He'd thought the distance from the buildings would provide safety. He didn't understand yet that distance meant nothing to the velvet damp. Distance was just another form of silence to traverse. He sat by the entrance to his tent as the green twilight turned to deep blue, then to a darkness so complete that his own hand became invisible before his eyes. And that's when he began to notice the sounds, or rather the attempts at sounds. There was a whispering, not quite audible, but felt, like wind in the trees, except there was no wind. The air was still and cold. It came from the direction of the main lodge, a soft rustling, like fabric dragging across stone. But beneath it, if you listened closely enough, was something else, something almost like breathing, the breathing of something vast and patient. William pulled himself inside the tent and zipped it shut, though he knew the gesture was meaningless. Moss didn't recognize barriers. Silence didn't acknowledge boundaries. Hours passed. He lay in his sleeping bag, fully clothed, glasses still on his face, and he listened. The rustling grew closer. Not moving necessarily. It wasn't as if he could hear footsteps approaching. Rather, the sound was encompassing, as if the darkness outside the tent was slowly filling with that soft noise, that patient whisper. And the worst part, the thing that would haunt him for the rest of his life, was how beautiful it sounded, how comforting, like a lullaby sung in a language he didn't understand, but whose meaning was crystal clear. Sleep, rest, stop fighting, join the silence, stop being separate, stop being loud, stop. His eyelids grew heavy, so very heavy. He kept catching himself nodding off, his head falling to his chest, and then jerking awake with an almost violent start. But each time he startled, he was a little less alarmed. The next time would be easier to surrender to. The next time, the next time, the next time. Somewhere around midnight, though time had become strange, elastic, unreliable, he heard something that made his heart stutter. A knock on the tent fabric. Not an aggressive knock, gentle, curious, like someone tapping at a window to wake you from a dream. He didn't answer. He held his breath. The knocking came again, 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. And then he heard it. A voice. His own voice. Not speaking words, just making that soft rustling sound, that almost breathing, almost whispering that he'd been hearing all night. It was him. Part of him was already out there. Part of him had already given in to the moss. He screamed, and that's what saved him. The scream shattered something, not the world, but the spell that was wrapping around his mind like those thick velvet layers of moss. He clawed his way out of the sleeping bag, out of the tent, and he ran in the absolute darkness with his arms up, branches whipping at his face, drawing blood that he would later swear felt warm and moved with purpose down his cheeks, as if it too was becoming part of something else. He ran until he found the jeep, ran until he could get the engine started, and even as he was backing up, sliding down that mountain road, he could see in his headlights the moss creeping across the ground behind him, slow and patient, like it had nowhere to be and all the time in the world. Behind him, the forest had gone utterly silent. William made it back to Gatlinburg. He made it to a hospital. The doctors found nothing wrong with him, though he wouldn't speak for 17 days. During that time, the nurses reported the strangest thing. He didn't sleep, but he didn't seem awake either. He existed in some state between, his eyes open, but focused on something they couldn't see. When he finally spoke, it was only to whisper. For the rest of his life, people said, that man would only whisper. He couldn't raise his voice above that rasp, that soft hiss, as if something in his throat had been changed, as if the moss had left its mark. He gave only one account of what happened, and he did it in fragments, between long silences. The details I've shared with you tonight, they come from that account, fragmented and reorganized. But there's something he never explained, something the investigators noted but never resolved. When William's tent was recovered and examined, they found something inside the sleeping bag. Threads of that velvet moss, still moist, still alive, still growing. It had been inside with him all along. And sometimes, on quiet nights in Gatlinburg, people in their homes report the strangest thing, the soft rustling at their windows, a patient, beautiful silence that seems to weight down the air. The moss never really left those mountains, you see. It's still there, still listening, still waiting, still learning to whisper. The old man's breathing becomes slower, more deliberate. A fade to silence, but not quite silence. Almost silence. The kind of silence that has something in it. Sleep now. Let the quiet take you. It's really quite kind. Before you drift off into that quiet place between waking and sleeping, before the moss of your own exhaustion pulls you deeper into the pillow, I need you to do something for me. You see, what I've told you tonight, it's not just a story. It's a warning. And warnings, they work best when they spread, when they whisper from one person to another, like the rustling in William Reeves' tent, like the patient sound of something moving through the dark. So I'm asking you, and I'm asking soft, the way the forest asks. Subscribe to Redacted archives. Let the notifications find you in the quiet of your night. Let them pull you back here to this place where the silence speaks. And more than that, I need you to comment. Tell me, have you felt it? Have you ever been somewhere so quiet that the silence itself seemed alive? Have you heard the rustling? Have you felt the moss creeping into your thoughts? The comments, they're how I know the silence is spreading. They're how I know others are listening. They're how the archive grows. Follow us. Share this with someone you know is awake at 3 a.m, unable to sleep, searching for something they can't name. Someone who understands that silence can be hungry. Because you see, the more of you who listen, the more of you who comment, the more real this becomes, the more present. And presence, as I told you at the beginning, is what silence truly is. Ring the bell. Let it remind you that you're not alone in the dark, even if the quiet is. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. And thank you for letting us know you're still here.